It's been on the political radar for a long time, but climate change has never been front and center the way it has been in this election cycle. It dominated the debate this week, and it's one of the topics that no party could afford to leave out of its platform. Here to assess what's on offer across the political spectrum, Catherine Abreu. She is Executive Director of the Climate Action Network Canada. Michael Bernstein, Executive Director at the national nonprofit Clean Prosperity. Tyrone Hall, advisor to the Alliance of Small Island Developing States, that's AOSIS for short, and a postdoctoral research fellow at York University. Andrew Brander, senior consultant with Crestview Strategy, and Fatima Syed, investigative reporter for the National Observer. And it's good to have everybody back here. Welcome back.
Thank you.
And welcome back to you, and welcome for the first time to the other three of you. Catherine, to you first. Is climate change the defining issue of this election in your view?
It sure is. I mean, look, I'm not going to pretend that climate change is the only thing that Canadian voters care about. We know, of course, that healthcare and affordability are high on the list. But when it comes to the substantive policy issues that are being discussed in an election that is otherwise characterized by mudslinging and name-calling, I'm seeing climate top the list on that.
Tyrone, what are you seeing?
I'd say it's certainly a higher priority issue, but I wouldn't quite go as far as Catherine, though the spirit of the debate so far certainly encourages me.
Michael.
I think climate is competing with affordability right now, and that's why you're seeing Canadians say climate change is a huge priority, and at the same time, you're seeing some Canadians say, I don't want to pay for climate action. So what I'd like to see the parties really pivot to is to say, look, there are ways that we can tackle this problem in a way that's pro-growth, in a way that's affordable for families, and one of those is the carbon tax and rebate that perhaps we'll get into. Yeah.
Fatima, in your judgment, has climate change been, hands down, the issue of the campaign?
I don't think it's the issue of the campaign, but I think it's the first time that an election campaign has seen climate reach the ballot box. And I think that is fascinating and that is interesting and a reflection of the times we're in.
Andrew.
Sounds like we all agree. Probably top five issues. Always in that top five, but never issue number one.
Do you find, do you regret that, given that obviously many people believe this is the issue of our times?
No, I don't. I personally don't. I don't think it's my number one issue as a voter. I think it's a very important challenge that needs to be addressed, and I'm really glad to see that every party has a substantial plan to address it. The credibility of those plans vary from party to party, but I do think the issue of affordability is number one, and until we can get to a place where those two issues can reconcile themselves in a balanced and pragmatic manner, then you're going to see affordability always top the climate.
Catherine, I don't see steam coming out of your ears because I think it's invisible, but I bet it is. When you hear people say affordability is far more important than the existence of the planet, what does that do to you?
I mean, I recollect some of the amazing leadership that we hear from international trade unions when they say there's no jobs on a dead planet. So whether we can, afford the cost of daily living, that's a big concern to me as well. But I want to be sure that I'm not only thinking about the next day, but about the next year and the next decade. And climate change is really essential to protecting the future of my ability to actually live on this planet. And I wouldn't agree also that every party has put forward a substantial climate platform. We have seen each of the major parties agree that climate change is an issue that they have to deal with. But one of the parties has put forward a platform that is far from substantial, in my opinion.
Which one?
The Conservative Party.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the People's Party.
Well, the People's Party of
doesn't believe in
Canada doesn't believe in climate change altogether, so we can just kind of knock them off the list of parties to consider on this issue.
Erin Kelly is a frequent guest on this program, and she doesn't just survey 1,000 or 1,500 people overnight to find out what Canadians are thinking. She surveys, with Polly, her artificial intelligence algorithm, 300,000 people all the time, and picks up engagement in many ways. And here's what she's had to say on this program in the past about what the public has to say on climate change. Sheldon, if you would, roll the clip. If energy affordability, as opposed to environmental integrity and so on, are what people are picking up on more, what do you think politicians should take away from that nugget of information?
That whatever climate change solutions are being proposed, they need to be proposed in a fiscally alert manner. So people are very concerned about cost. the cost of these programs. They want to see programs in there, but they want to see a whole package. How is this going to work? There's been a lot of talk of, you can't just tax me on these things. What's the replacement? How am I getting to work? How am I heating my home? So it needs to be a wholesome discussion and not just this in isolation and that in isolation.
Andrew, that's basically what you're saying, isn't it?
That's absolutely right. And if you look at any of the recent polls as well, they'll indicate close to 50% of people don't even want to spend a single cent more on initiatives. They agree with the importance of it, but once you start applying a price point to the cost of those promises, that's where you start to lose people. And once you're up to the $100 value, most people will say, 80% in fact, will say that they're not willing to spend that amount on these initiatives.
Tyrone, your view on what Aaron had to say?
I think there's a misconception that there is a prohibitive cost element to tackling climate change. And I think Catherine has pointed this out quite clearly in other interviews, that the studies show us that cost is no longer a prohibitive factor in transitioning, which is the underlying issue with dealing with climate change. So what the policymakers ought to do is to present the climate change challenge as a comprehensive economic rethinking reform opportunity, because climate action is really about doing things we have to do anyway. Sort of climate proofing or ports or food systems, it's creating new jobs, it's all an opportunity. It's not just a cost factor. So suggesting that the money you pay upfront is the totality of the cost associated with the action is short-sighted and not a complete picture of what's taking place.
Doesn't take into account other costs down the road, for example?
There are other costs and gains down the road that can be accounted for.
Okay, but Michael, if that's where Canadians are, and Aaron's polling is usually pretty bang on, you okay with that?
Well, Canadians have options that allow them to take climate action and do it in an affordable way. So even if you look at this polling that Andrew's citing, the reality is this core tool, the carbon tax and rebate, allows us to actually achieve both ends. We know, for example, that people in Ontario, 80% of them are going to get more back in rebates than they pay in carbon tax. And really, it's only the 20% wealthiest households that on average are going to pay anything out of pocket. So we have tools available to us. And quite frankly, I have to agree with Kat on the fact that we have 3 of the major parties supporting this policy, and we have one party, the Conservative Party, who said they're going to take away this tool, the most critical tool we have, as their first order of business.
Okay, that's a good segue to get us into this, because we are going to look party by party by party by party at what they have on offer. Sheldon, why don't you bring up the first graphic here? This is what is in the Liberals' Climate Action Plan. Here are some of the highlights. They have, of course, introduced the carbon tax, as just described. They approved the Trans Mountain Expansion Project and plan to invest every dollar into Canada's so-called clean energy transition. They promise to achieve net zero emissions by the year 2050. They have announced plans to plant 2 billion trees, and they intend to ban single-use plastics. On this Liberal record of what they have done and what they intend to do, let's get some feedback. Fatima, what do you say?
Look, everyone that I've spoken to says that the Liberals have brought a climate plan to the table, which has been huge and has been celebrated as such. But they have bought a pipeline, and that negates any good things that they may have done.
Does it?
I think it does.
It negates every good thing they've done?
Not every good thing, but a lot of the good things they've done. And the reason I say this is because there was a report in The Guardian today that suggested that for almost 40% of the carbon emissions that have been produced since 1965 across the world are because of 20 fossil fuel companies. And the fact that we're investing in a pipeline to sort of perpetuate that amount, perhaps, one could argue, is a problem. I think Canadians agree on one thing across the board, which is that we need climate action that is strong, that is ambitious, that actually tackles the crisis in a way that, as Tyrone said, addresses economic reform across the board and really gets to the challenge in whether it comes to housing, whether it comes to jobs, whether it comes to transport, across the board. And we're not seeing that from the Liberal plan.
Catherine, do you believe the purchase of that pipeline negates other good things the Liberal Party may have done or is proposing to do?
Listen, Canada has a cognitive dissonance problem when it comes to developing fossil fuel infrastructure while thinking we can meet our climate targets. We see that cognitive dissonance across all of the parties. All of the federal parties right now want to build fossil fuel infrastructure of one kind or another, whether it's pipelines, LNG terminals, or refining. So how do we talk about that in Canada? That's the major question I want to ask. My concerns over affordability can only be addressed if Canada takes a look at economic diversification moving forward, rather than continuing to double down on investments in fossil fuel infrastructure that are no longer working for the environment or the economy. So I want to have a conversation in this country about the future of prosperity and job creations in Canada that will improve affordability over the long run while protecting the climate to make sure that we're going to stick around in that long run.
Okay, Michael, you just said a moment ago that you thought the carbon tax was a good approach to take. So let me skip over you for a second and get Andrew Brander here. Your view on the Liberals, what they've done and what they propose.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you pre-position it and talk about a record, because I don't think there's much of one to stand on, to be quite honest. And Canadians should be rightfully skeptical of their plan right now. After the 2015 election campaign, they signed on to the Paris commitments. They have failed to remain on course to meet those commitments, while provinces like Ontario are set to meet those agreements. In addition to that, as I said, I don't think there's much of a plan. It's not costed. There's still further questions on how high the carbon tax is going to go.
A little quick follow-up here. Had Stephen Harper won that last election instead of Justin Trudeau, he signed on to Paris. Do you think we'd be on track to meet those targets?
It's the same targets, and I think he would have come out with some real commitments in order to do so. Yes, I do.
Michael,
just a couple comments here. I mean, first of all, I think that's ignoring some of the facts, frankly. I mean, the Liberal plan, I would give it about a B. Sure, it needs to go further, but the reality is we've cut about 2/3. We've gone about 2/3 of the way that we need to get to the Paris Agreement, and we need to get further than that. The Paris Agreement is not enough. We need to get to a pathway of 1.5 degrees Celsius to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. But to say that the Liberals haven't made meaningful progress just ignores a whole host of programs that have been put into place. And just quickly, I would make one comment on the pipeline. I do agree that we need to have a real conversation in Canada about how we're going to address our fossil fuel sector while also making meaningful progress on climate change. But I do worry that this one pipeline has become a bit of a red herring in this discussion. If you look at the number of emissions that are going to come from this specific pipeline, it's between 1% and 2% of Canadian emissions. So would we have a lower total carbon footprint without it? Sure we would. But is this the be-all and end-all? I don't think so.
Tyrone, last word on the GRITS plan, and then we'll move on.
I think the Liberal plan is particularly problematic because it puts us on course to doing something Canada is becoming defined by internationally, which is that it has no sort of credibility on this question of honoring its international commitments, particularly on meeting emission targets. We missed the 1992 Rio target. We missed the 2005 Kyoto target. We're on course to missing the 2020 Copenhagen target. And we're on course based on the projections that we have here to again, miss another major target. And so when you put forward another pipeline, particularly channeling one of the worst forms of fossil fuels, you are going to just exacerbate that challenge. We cannot afford to undermine the country's reputation any further.
Okay, Mr. Director, let's do plan number 2 here. This is the Conservatives' Climate Action Plan, and here are some of the highlights, and you know what highlight number 1 is. Get rid of that carbon tax. That's what Andrew Scheer has been talking about so many times during the course of the campaign. They want to set emission standards for major emitters that will lower greenhouse gases and drive Canadian businesses to the highest standards of green technology. They want to create a 2-year green homes tax credit for homeowners, and they want to launch the so-called Canadian Clean brand for Canadian products. Catherine, your view of what the Conservatives have on offer.
So I think maybe the one place that Andrew and I agree is that every party has the potential to enact leadership on climate change. Climate change is a nonpartisan issue. It's a political issue, but it should not be a partisan one. And in fact, we have seen Conservative parties in the past take significant environmental leadership in Canada. Unfortunately, the current Conservative Party is completely missing in action. They have offered a climate plan that doesn't once talk about reducing emissions, the number one thing that you have to do in order to address climate change. It's all well and good to talk about developing green technology, and certainly we will need investments in technology moving forward. But the fact is, right now, we have the technology we need to take action. It's no more waiting around for some new silver bullet to come save us. It's about taking the action we can now while continuing to invest in improvements moving forward.
Andrew?
Yeah, I disagree. I think that there are plenty of progressive ideas in the Conservative platform when we talk about investments in green technologies, when we talk about investments in public transportation. And I think the point that the Conservatives are trying to make is there's a significant contribution Canada can make, those investments in green technology, finding those, innovating here and being able to export that technology around the world to reduce emissions worldwide, because this is obviously a global problem. Canada's only 1.6% of global emitters.
But would you agree they got to show leadership anyway?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think they are showing leadership. I think this is also a reasonable, pragmatic approach that's balanced, and I think that's something that the other plans are lacking.
Tyrone, what do you see in the Conservative plan?
I see contorted logic. We generally say buy into the Conservative logic that they aren't for a carbon tax, but in effect, they are proposing a carbon tax. It's just unclear at what rate and how it will work.
Okay, hang on, explain that to me. Because they've been nothing but clear that they want to get rid of the carbon tax.
But what they've put forward is to say for heavy industry, they will establish a cap at which you will begin to tax or compel industry to invest a certain amount for breaching the industry average. That is, in effect, a carbon tax.
It's a price on carbon, isn't it?
Precisely. But because they've created this narrative of opposing the most significant element of what we have on the table, they're doing these contortions around it, which is problematic, and it's consistent.
Let me go to Andrew on that for a second. We understand why calling it a carbon tax is a political problem. Is that why you guys are essentially doing the same thing, just not calling it a carbon tax?
No, this is obviously a plan that's designed to ensure that big polluters are held accountable. But what this isn't is a tax on Canadians. It's not a tax at the pumps. It's not a tax that's going to increase the price of groceries, of clothing, of everything that people have to go and buy and purchase. And we are not in a post-fossil fuel economy where people, don't have to drive to work, or people, don't have to do certain things just to get
Michael,
by.
let me get your take on that. Would you agree that by removing the carbon tax from the everyday costs that people have to experience and putting it rather on the biggest emitters, that this is a preferable way to go?
Not at all. We evaluated the Conservative plan, as have other experts, and we found that this was actually going to raise emissions relative to the status quo. So what kind of climate plan actually raises emissions? And at the same time, you spoke about cost, Andrew, it's actually going to increase costs for households because it removes those rebates that are going back to families. So to me, it's a little bit like saying there's a fire in your house and the Conservatives are saying, we're concerned about the fire, but you can't use a fire extinguisher. You're not allowed to call the fire department. And maybe we'll have some technology in the future that might find a way to solve this problem. It's pretty hard to take seriously.
Fatima, I'm sorry.
And it's also saying we're somehow going to make the fire on the block less by making our personal fire worse. I mean, saying that we're going to reduce global emissions by increasing our own is just a bizarre twist of logic.
Fatima, your view on the Conservative plan?
I think the times right now demand a Swiss Army knife of options that we're not seeing in the Conservative plan. I think that, they're banking their hopes on the fact that technology will clean up all the carbon from our atmosphere, and that's not going to work. And even if it does...
Do we actually know that?
Well, as in, it's not going to work in the short term, is what I was going to say. It's going to take a lot of time, but we need action right now. We need something that will meet the targets that we're already way behind on, and the Conservative plan is not meeting that. And on top of that, my personal concern with the Conservative plan is that we don't have clarity on what it looks like. If I compare it to the Doug Ford government's plan, which I'm familiar with and which has similar proposals, in terms of putting a cap on industry as opposed to a carbon tax, we don't yet know what that looks like. We don't have details about that. And I worry that if this exists on a federal level, we're still going to see a lack of clarity, which will translate into a lack of action.
Tyrone, last word on the Conservative plan.
The most problematic element is that they're banking on clean tech, particularly the hope, the wish that you could enforce Article 6 of the Paris Agreement to sort of get credit for exporting green tech that will be developed. That is unlikely to be enforced, to be approved. Because if you do that, you have to also admit that when you import from high emission parts of the world, that you are importing and contributing to carbon emissions. So it's quite a bit of contortions. You have to look at the whole picture, and the plan, as Fatima was pointing out, lacks details and does not honestly engage with the totality of the picture.
Okay, moving on. Here is plan number 3. This is the NDP's Climate Action Plan, and here are the highlights. Jagmeet Singh would like to establish a new Canadian climate bank to boost investment in renewable energy, energy efficiency, and low-carbon technology across the country. He would declare a climate emergency and put in place greenhouse gas reduction targets that will help stabilize the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. He would eliminate fossil fuel subsidies and redirect those funds to low-carbon initiatives, and he would also bring forward a program that would retrofit all housing stock in Canada by the year 2050. Okay. Let's go to Andrew. Why don't we give you the first word on this one? What do you think?
Sounds like a lot of pieces that are in the Conservative plan as well, to be quite honest. So I do like Jagmeet Singh's plan. I think it's thoughtful and gets a lot of conversation around the same types of pieces that we're talking about, real actions that do reduce emissions.
Can I be mischievous here for a second?
Yeah.
Are you complimenting his plan
in
hopes of taking liberal-leaning supporters away from the Liberals and giving them to the Democrats, which helps the Conservatives?
Not that thoughtful. But I do think
the short answer is yes. But keep going.
However, I will say it's unattainable. And it's unreasonable to think that these don't come with huge price tags attached to it at the scale that he's talking about.
Fatima, how ambitious is this plan in your view?
It's very ambitious. It's, he's imagining a Canada without fossil fuels already at this federal level. And he's also envisioning, interesting things like a Canadian climate bank. I do agree with Andrew. We don't know what it looks like on a cost level. And unfortunately, we're still at a time where we have to put cost and climate change together in the same sentence. And I think that's a concern people have with the NDP plan. We love the ambition. All the analysts love the ambition. I think people will respect the ambition. We just don't know how much it's going to cost us.
How achievable, Catherine, is this NDP plan?
So listen, let me first tackle this myth that Canada is only 1.6% of global emissions. We hear that all the time. What we don't hear is that 1.6%, Canada is in the top 10 of net emitters globally. We've been in the top 10 for the last century. We've never left it. So that means that there are at least 180 other countries that emit more than Canada, or that emit less than Canada. So we're a significant contributor to the problem. When it comes to per capita, Canadians emit more than pretty much anyone anywhere else on the planet. The NDP plan recognizes the scale of the challenge, acknowledges the contribution that Canada is making to the global climate crisis, and is talking about some significant steps to move us in a direction of leadership away from being that significant global contributor. It also acknowledges that while we, of course, will be using fossil fuels for a few more years, we have to think ahead and prepare for a future where we are successful in taking action on climate change, and we are protecting workers and communities as we move away from an economy that is dependent on greenhouse gas intensive industries. It's not about doing it today. It's not about blowing everything up right away. It's about making a plan and ensuring that there's a just transition into that future.
How achievable is this plan in your view, Tyrone?
I think it's very practical. It's quite achievable. And the reason I say that is that they're tackling transportation, the electricity sector, and housing. Canada already gets about 2/3 of its electricity from renewable energy sources. Scaling that up is very much within reach. It's ambitious because it's tackling transportation. It's number 2 in terms of sectors that are the second highly ranked source of emission in Canada. So it's ambitious and it's tackling key sources of the problem, and it's delivering jobs. There's this keen focus on training young people and the whole population for clean energy jobs. It's it's targeted at the right points. I think it's very ambitious.
Michael.
I agree it's ambitious. Overall, I'd probably give it a B. I think it gets an A for ambition, but where I would like to see it improved is I think the NDP program does have some very high price tag initiatives that haven't been fully thought out. And what I would like to see them do is more fully leverage that core tool of the carbon tax and rebate. So I think if they were to propose raising that carbon tax, they would be able to achieve some of the same emissions reductions at a lower cost.
Andrew, did you want another word on this NDP
Yeah,
plan?
no, I'd just say in reference to what was brought up earlier about Canada being in the top 10 in terms of global emitters, it's obviously a problem that needs a global solution. Canada is number 10, and the only other country in that top 10 that has made a commitment to reduce emissions to net zero by 2050 is Germany. So I think other partners need to be at the table, or all of this is for naught.
Okay, Catherine, can I do a little fact check with you here? Because there was a moment in the leaders' debate the other night where there was some confusion about whether building a refinery in Alberta is or is not in the NDP platform. Jagmeet Singh insisted it wasn't. Andrew Scheer said, I've read it, it's in there.
Yeah.
Can you help us on this?
Yeah, so both the Greens and the NDP have said that we need to improve refining capacity in Canada. The Greens have been more specific about what that means, i.e., where will we build the refineries in Alberta? The NDP has said we need to grow our refining capacity, so they didn't specifically pinpoint one refinery in Alberta, but that's what that means.
It does mean that. It doesn't mean shipping it somewhere else or having greater access to other refineries elsewhere in North America.
Yeah, so they're wanting to do this to keep jobs in Canada, which means building that refining capacity in Canada.
Okay, gotcha. Let's do plan number 4 now. Here comes the Greens. The Green Party's Climate Action Plan, and here are the highlights. Cancel the Trans Mountain Pipeline, as well as other subsidies to fossil fuel industries. Introduce a Climate Change Act requiring a 60% cut in climate-changing emissions below the 2005 levels by the year 2030 and reaching net zero in 2050. Maintain a broad-based, revenue-neutral carbon fee on all sources of carbon dioxide pollution, and ban the sale of internal combustion engine passenger vehicles by 2030. Let me repeat that last one. No more internal combustion engine passenger vehicles on the roads in 10 years. Okay, I have a feeling as we go around the table here, everybody's going to give this one an E for excellent on ambition. But again, can we do this? Michael.
I think it's going to be very difficult. I would probably give this plan overall a B-. I think there's some things to really like about it. I think what you read about the carbon fee, the Greens are the only ones who are saying to Canadians, look, we can use that tool of a carbon tax and rebate to get along a significant part of the emissions reductions we need. So they're going to grow that all the way to $130 by 2030. But on the other hand, there are a number of pretty heavy government interventionist policies, including the one you just read about the internal combustion engines. In addition to that, they're saying no more oil development, no more pipelines, no more exports of coal. All these things have the right intention. I think they have noble ambitions, but I'd like to see them do it in a more cost-effective way.
Even if, Catherine, maybe you know this, even if we wanted to get every gas-burning car off the roads in 10 years' time, is there enough capacity in the system to build battery-powered cars to take all their places?
So I think the Green Party is actually saying that we're going to no longer see the sale of internal combustion engines by 2030. Not that in 2030 we're just going to take every single internal combustion engine that's already on the road and rip it away.
Got it.
We know that one of the greatest barriers to the penetration of electric vehicles in Canada is actually the supply of electric vehicles. So we do have to build out that charging infrastructure. We also have to make sure that the cars are there for the people who want to buy them. When it comes to the Green Party plan, I mean, talk about recognizing the scale of the challenge. Not only are they recognizing the scale of the challenge, but they're the most real about the scale of the response that's required. Yes. It's not going to be cheap. And they're comfortable in saying that. They're also the ones that are being the most honest about the cost of inaction. And I think that that's something that the rest of the parties are not as comfortable talking about. If we don't do those things, we're going to be a whole lot worse off. Of course, what the scale of the response requires is not business as usual. And the Greens are saying we need to be moving away from business as usual. This is a war level effort that is going to be required from Canadian society. And they're also talking about working together with other parties. And that is, I think, a really important part of their plan, because ultimately, none of the parties are going to be able to do this job alone. So far, we've seen the politics of climate change in this election be characterized by politics of polarization. The Greens are trying to switch over to politics of collaboration, and that's where we need to be going.
Fatima, compare and contrast the Greens versus everybody else.
The thing that I think about when I'm comparing these plans is come October 22nd, if they went to Parliament Hill and put everything that they're saying in their plan in action, would that be possible, first of all? And second of all, how amazing would that be? The Green Plan, amazing. That world would definitely be a climate crisis-less world, in Canada at least. But in terms of possible, it will be hard. But like Kat said, I think the Green Party is a reality check compared to all the other plans. They're not shying away from the fact that we have to do everything we possibly can to address the biggest crisis of our times. And this is what we need to envision moving forward. We need to envision a fossil fuel-less industry. We need to envision a world without carbon pollution and what that looks like. And I think that is amazing.
Tyrone, your view of the Green Plan?
It is very ambitious. It's the most ambitious. It's one of only 2 of the plans before us that is consistent with the best available science. It's one of only 2 plans that acknowledges a 1.5 degree more ambitious goal in the Paris Agreement. And for all the talk of it lacking realism, it still doesn't even go far enough because it does not sear itself to the heart of the policy-making process by tackling issues like socioeconomic differentiations. How will some of these...
Help
how
me
does it
understand
help?
what that means.
How does it help us to tackle issues such as poverty and the differentiated risks that climate change poses to different segments of the Canadian population? Where is a poverty reduction element in this ambitious plan? I think if you infuse it with that, I'd be very happy.
Gotcha. Andrew, your view of the Green Plan?
It's costed at least that much, unlike the Liberals' plan. So I'll give them that much. But it's also very costly, as we've had agreement on that on the panel as well. Every single one of those points that was coming up on the screen, I can just hear ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. And I think at the end of the day, it's also the Green Party naming their price. We'll see where they end up on election night. But I do think any of those promises could certainly be a good bargaining chip in a minority situation.
I'd like to go around the table now that we've compared and contrasted all the plans, and I want a one-word answer from each of you. Which party has on offer the best plan? Tyrone.
The Greens.
The Greens.
You can't ask me to answer this question.
Well, you're a straight-up reporter, but you don't actually have to opine. But having done an analysis, do you have a view?
The Greens.
Catherine.
We need elements from the Liberal, Green, and NDP platforms to make this work.
Michael.
I'm going to hedge slightly and just say I think 3 of the parties have really strong plans, and I'm more worried about the Conservatives not having a strong enough plan.
Andrew.
I disagree. The Conservatives have the only realistic plan that speaks to the average Canadian.
That's not necessarily saying it's the best plan, it's the most realistic plan. Those are different things, you'd acknowledge.
I'd acknowledge that.
Okay.
Sure.
Are we, Fatima, you first on this, are we at a turning point? We don't know what the next House is going to look like, right? I mean, probably the one thing we do know, although you never know, but maybe it's going to be a hung parliament. So it is going to require some getting together from more than one party for whatever is going to transpire after the 21st of October. Do you think the next parliament has the potential to be a turning point for climate action rather than climate talk?
It has to.
I know it has to, but do you think it will?
Yes, and the reason I say this is because Canadians are demanding it. If we learned anything from 2 weeks ago from the climate crisis, the climate protests that took place not just across the world, but in Canada, where 1 million Canadians took to the streets, from rural communities in the north to big cities like Toronto, people are demanding this. So whether they like it or not, climate action is what we're going to have to talk about when the government reconvenes after the election.
Politics is the art of the possible, Michael. So I want to know, if it's a Liberal minority government, do you see the possibility of multiple parties working together to do something better on the environment?
I think there's a very strong possibility of that. I think we're going to see I think you're going to see the NDP'S and the Greens likely increase the ambition of the Liberal plan even further. I think the only risk of that minority parliament is that what we'll see is it may not be a strong enough signal to the Conservatives to reverse course on their policies. I mean, the Conservatives have traditionally been strong on the environment. It just so happens this particular iteration of a plan is not strong enough. So my hope is that they get a strong signal from this election to say, we need a more serious plan.
Andrew, if it's a Conservative minority government, can it survive long enough without the assistance of the other parties, given that the other parties certainly don't agree with the Conservatives' approach on the environment?
I think any of the leaders are going to be held to account for the promises that they make during the course of this campaign, and that's why I think it's very important that leaders are making realistic promises that Canadians can hold and the Parliament can hold them accountable for.
We got a minute left. I'm going to give 30 seconds to Tyrone, 30 seconds to Catherine. Your view on how the next Parliament, however it comes back, what that agglomeration can do to handle this issue.
I think no matter what the conglomeration pans out to be, we will get some traction on climate change. Even if there is a Liberal minority-led government, I agree that they'll be compelled to scale up the ambition of their plans. But I still, no matter the configuration, I worry about the jurisdictional issues that will stymie some of the more ambitious intentions, especially around getting rid of subsidies on fossil fuel.
Okay. Catherine, you get the last word.
Some of the greatest achievements that we've had in Canada have been accomplished under minority governments. Healthcare is a great example of that, which also had to deal with a number of jurisdictionality issues. There's a lot to learn from healthcare when it comes to climate.
Pension plan? Yep.
We earlier on this session were talking about Canadians saying that they were unwilling to fork over a few dollars for climate action. The problem with that formulation is that it puts the responsibility in individuals. What Canadians are doing in this election is saying, it's not about me as an individual. It's not about how much money I'm willing to put on my credit card. It's about a collective societal investment in taking action on a collective problem and a collective crisis. And I am confident that they're going to be giving whoever lands in government a strong mandate to deal with that collectively. 3
words, Catherine. We shall see. I want to thank all of you for coming into TVO tonight, helping us out by comparing and contrasting the party platforms on the environment and climate change. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.